All right, welcome back, everybody. We are here at Higher Labs Coding Bootcamp. We are in week 4 of 6, so we're more than halfway done. We're in our front end design and development week, day 8 out of 12. We're going to be talking about front end frameworks and JavaScript today. So last time we ended up writing some CSS and moving some stuff around out into some external static files. We're going to do something similar today with JavaScript. We'll write a little bit of it. But we're going to start by talking about frameworks, which, similar to Django, when we do our backend framework, front end frameworks do similar things, right? They provide pre-built functionality for front end stuff, common front end concerns, things like forms and buttons and things for pictures and videos and that all that kind of stuff that makes a site look interesting and fun to play with on the front end is going to be involved in a front end framework. And JavaScript is the language of the web. So we're doing everything with Python and a framework built in Python, Django, to do our web development. But I've said this before, and I want to make really, really clear that Python is not the best at doing web development. There are companies I've listed before, places like Mozilla, the guys that do Firefox, or Instagram, or Netflix, and these places that use YouTube, that use Django, and they're big companies and stuff. So it is a viable option for web things. It's not horrible, but JavaScript by far is the language of the web. Is like really that is its main use case. So there are backend frameworks written in JavaScript, and most front end frameworks are written in JavaScript. So if you're going to stay in web development, if it's something you want to take seriously and do more of, JavaScript is really a good thing to learn. TypeScript, as another one, is like a more modern language that's also really, really, really popular. And it's really, if you know a little Python and a little JavaScript, TypeScript is basically the same. It's kind of like JavaScript trying to be Python. But today we're going to write a little bit of JavaScript, but talk about how it fits into frameworks and how it can be used. So similar to what we do with CSS, we wrote some manually, but then we're going to see how to leverage it from other places where we don't have to write it all explicitly ourselves. And that brings me to one of my favorite memes of all time. But how it's relevant here is that all these front end frameworks, these little logos here around the earth, are different front end frameworks. So there's Angular, this A thing, this little atom looking thing is React. Vue is V. And then, I don't know, Svelte. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, actually. I've never heard it said out loud. Just SVELTE is this little S looking thing. But all of these are built on JavaScript. They're all JavaScript underneath, right? So if you learn JavaScript, you could use in these front end frameworks, and CSS as like a tag as well as they do. Those are the things that they handle. That's what they're written in. That's what they're referencing to. Today, we're going to use an older, these are all modern, more modern front end frameworks. We're going to use a much older front end framework. It's still viable, it's still useful, but it's just easy to get to and easy to use as a teaching tool, called Bootstrap, if anybody's familiar with that one. It's a fairly old one. It was invented by Twitter a long time ago, and still free, easy to use, accessible. We're going to use the CSS out of Bootstrap, and we're going to write our own JavaScript, but JavaScript is also in there. I'll point that out in places that it exists, but we're not going to really plug it in ourselves. It's plugged in the documentation. So we're going to jump in and kind of get hands-on right away and start doing like a little review, and then press on with our front-end stuff, write some JavaScript, do a little bit more of plugging things in. Does anybody have any questions before we do on that? Anything we've covered so far, or about kind of the concepts we talked about today? We're not going real deep in any conceptual things. It's about it for concepts. So anybody have any questions before we move on? All right. Then move on we shall. So let's get out of here. And for the first thing we do, let's just look at where we left our site. So last time we made our site look beautiful, like this one right here. This is amazing. I think we're done with front end. This is it. We can package this up and give it to our users. No, so what we did is we just looked at the basic mechanics of how to set different attributes of front end things, like the colors. You see these background colors up here. We did some connecting things with A tags and our links. And we can look at our file structure. I'm going to go ahead and just open up files as a reminder of what we did for the most part. So I'm going to go into my site, templates, base. And this is going to be doing most of what we do today. And this is, again, a refresher on sort of what we did last time. So if you remember, we ended with putting our custom CSS definitions for we had an ID called main background, and we had a class that we defined called green background. And we move those over into a separate CSS file. Let me pop that open, have a look. Once again, my site. But we're gonna go to the project level static folder. Recall we made this static folder. We made styles inside of it, and we have our main styles.css. And this is where we have those definitions in CSS. So this is CSS. This is an ID, the hash, and this is what is this with the period? Anybody remember? What's this called? Anybody?
A style? A
Oh,
class. Class.
class. Very good. All right. Anybody remember why we would use a class or an ID? What's the choice we're making here? What's the difference?
I remember like um, ID is only for like one thing.
Yes, exactly. So class is going to be used a lot more frequently. It could be used on any number of things. An ID is just one thing. Think of it again, like your ID. You have it's you, identifies you as one person, but you can be grouped into a class. Like say veterans. We're all veterans, but we're all individual people. So a class could be veteran. ID would be like you yourself, right? So class is more frequently used. And if you recall, we have this in our this directory up here. So my site static styles main-styles.css. These are our class definitions that say specifically what to do. This is that green background color that we see behind the two A tags. And if we look in our base.html, we have our green background as a class. So this, again, what we did last time is where we ended up. So we have our CSS in a file somewhere, and we are referencing it by the class name. So what we're going to do today is we're going to continue in this same vein, but we're going to hook up basically up here where we have our own style sheet, and we did this manually and pointed to our own thing. We're going to do similarly, but point to somebody else's. And that's kind of how it works. We point to somebody else's framework, and then we can just use their class definitions to make our site look nice without having to go and write our own explicit CSS line by line like this is. And that's what frameworks are going to do for us. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. So again, any questions about any of this before we move on? Any questions about where we are now, what we've done up to this point? All right. Cool. So first thing we should do every day we start. Now we're not going to do a lot in here in our bash console. We will later, but not right away. First thing we do regardless is we're going to start our virtual environment. So we do that with source. I'm in my home directory because that's where I kept my virtual environment directory when I called it venv. So we source the name of virtual environment, bin, and activate. We know it's up when we got the name of the virtual environment within our parentheses in front of our control. And then we're going to move into our top level root project root directory, which is my site, top level my site. And then let's have a look again here. I'm actually going to make my screen smaller before I do this. Let's have a look using our tree command. We're going to ignore all of our PyCache stuff we did before. So we can pass a string of things we'd like to ignore. So double underscore PyCache, double underscore a vertical bar to mean or. So we can put other patterns in there. So to not show us all the stuff that's in the admin folder, we're going to ignore any CSS, we're ignoring any images, and we're going to ignore anything that's called JS for JavaScript. And this should give us a breakdown of our current structure. So this dot, if you recall again, stands for where you are now, the current working directory, which as we know is this tilde my site, the tilde meaning our home directory, right? That's /home /username. This is the database that was made automatically for us. We'll talk more about it next week when we do our backend stuff. We're not going to do a whole lot with it right now. You don't really interact with it directly most of the time. Here's our entry point in manage.py, our settings level my site thing, project level. And last time we made this static directory with the styles directory inside of it and then ran collect static. And recall, what is collect static? What does collect static do? Because someone kind of explained their understanding of what we did when we hit collect static at the end of class.
I think it like copy and paste to a new folder.
Yes, Yes, which folder?
Static style. Nah.
Static
Static main.
main. Yes. So what it does is it looks into all project directories for any directory named static. Does anybody remember why it looks for static specifically? Why does it look for this name static? Did we tell it to? Does it know to automatically? Is there something built into Django?
The static was the default. I don't know. Like
Okay,
it was
close.
already set in Django.
We had to set it. We had to set it. It was in our settings up high. It was the name that we gave it to tell it that that's where we're going to put our static files. We could have literally, I mean, we could have called this whatever we wanted to. It's kind of a convention to use static so that it's good to use these conventions so that other people can come here, you yourself included later if you work on this project or another project down the line years after you started it to know that your static files are in static. But we had to declare this in our settings.py when we first started as what the directory we're going to use for static file is going to be called. So again, it's looking through all of those and it takes everything that's inside of it and copies anything that's changed, anything that's new in here. Okay, so that's the what. Anybody remember why collect static does this? Why is that something that we need to do when we make something like a style sheet? Why do we need to collect the static? What is that doing for us? Anybody other than Alex want to try taking a swing at that? Or even Alex, you got something? You've been answering everything up to now, but do we remember why we run collect static and what is being done? No? Okay. Okay.
I don't know the reason.
Okay. All right. So I really want everybody to be clear. We're going to run it again today and we can talk about it again later, but I want to be really clear on why we do everything, right? So the why of collect static, Django again is not the best at doing static files, but this is how it does it. So what it does is it's saving itself time later, basically. And all these different, we're going to make a static directory in to do today, and we're going to have specific application static files. And as a project grows, there'll be more and more applications alongside this to do application, and each of them will have their own static files. So what static collect static does is it puts it into one place so that when the site is actually running from the server, remember we're getting requests from a user on a browser sent to the server, and the server is where our code is. Remember we hit reload here while we're doing any of our developing work, like in Python anywhere, hit this little button, we reload server side code. That is going to make it faster when it's serving from the server to just go to this one main directory to find all static files. So that's what collect static is doing. It's making it faster to be served later. Everybody tracking that?
You said making faster?
Yeah, make it faster so it can be accessed in one directory as opposed to having to go through the entire project directory once the site is up and running. Does that make sense?
No.
No?
But I'll just I'll see and hopefully it makes sense in
So
the future.
yeah, so the idea is that it's instead of having to go like think of it as like when the site is being served, quite literally, think of it as a server in a restaurant, right? That has to go back to get each part of this web page that you've made and bring it up and do something with it, right? If it has to go to several, if this restaurant has like 20 different rooms, if it has to go to each one of those rooms to get something, it's going to take longer than if it just goes into one place and gets the things and brings it back to the customers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kind of. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to confuse things further, but basically keep in mind collect static makes things faster. We're going to use it a couple more times. It makes it faster at the time. We're going to use it again for doing our scripts today, and we'll add some more stuff to the static main, and hopefully this will kind of concrete or cement it for us as we see it. All right. Cool. So with that, we've got our environment set up. We're in our project root at my site. Any questions, anything else before we move on? We're gonna dive into plugging in our framework and messing around with it a little bit.
Quick question. I kind of stopped as you was creating those CSS files for the static and in the last video. Do we
Okay.
need those created for to move on now?
No, not necessarily. You could leave your CSS if like the last point you had it was still in your
Yeah.
um that's fine. And we're actually just like right now the CSS we're gonna use, you know, it would be cool if you had both of them. You could play around with the one thing that we're gonna do, but not necessary because we're gonna just use Bootstrap from now on. Like we're basically gonna replace that CSS that we did with Bootstrap right now. So
Oh, cool. Okay.
you'll be fine. Yeah, yeah, you'll be totally fine. Um, cool. Anything else? Any other questions? All right, then let's get into Bootstrap. All right, so this is a place we're gonna be doing most of our work. And if you're following along, or if you did look at the documentation at all, the very first thing we need to do is go to the Bootstrap website. So it's in the documentation, but it's also just in our free coding resources. If you go down to like references and documentation, kind of midway in the page, there's a Bootstrap section. We go to Get Bootstrap, and here it is in all its glory, probably built with Bootstrap. And when you go to these documentation sites for any of these frameworks, for pretty much any tool, it's going to run through sort of the same. You're going to be looking for the same bits and pieces, right? Some way to plug it into your project and use it. It may be a little confusing again as you're first doing this, knowing exactly what it is you want, because you come down here and you'll have this thing that says, "Oh, this is how you get it. You do this npm thing, and this dollar sign looks like it's a terminal." That's great. We're not using npm. We're not going to mess with that. There's a couple things there's like install in your via package manager, which again they use npm because that's we're using pip. It's a Python thing. This npm is a JavaScript thing. Or it says include via cdn. This is the option we're going to go with, just because it's very very simple. It's quite literally this one line of code that we're going to copy and we're going to plug into our html. Anybody actually familiar with what cdn means and what that is?
No, it's first I've seen of this.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else know cdn? So basically it stands for content delivery network. Not going to dive deeply into it, but it what it does, at its most basic, is it figures out where physically in the world a request is coming from, like where you are asking for something from, and it'll give you that thing from the closest server where you are, right? So let's say, I'm in Thailand accessing the site that I'm making. This CDN will deliver stuff from like Hong Kong or Taiwan or something like that, wherever the server is that is closest to me. And if I'm here in California doing it, it might be coming from Oregon or, wherever else they have their servers down in LA or something like that.
Is it
So
similar to a VPN?
no, it's not. VPN does more of like obscuring where you're accessing something from. This is more about sending stuff to you.
Gotcha. Okay.
So these files, and I'm going to copy this here. I'm going to show you where it goes in context, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in detail. But this is referencing a CSS file or a JavaScript file. We're gonna mess with the CSS first, but you could do the same thing with JavaScript in the same exact way that we did when we wrote our own CSS file and referenced it this way. It's just referencing through the internet, right? So what a CDN is doing is the place that this is stored, and they're stored like several servers around the world. And a CDN basically just decides where you are and says, okay, this is the closest server to you. I'm going to send you this file from that server. Does that make sense? That's what a CDN is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, so it's basically just like the closest file to where you are is what a CDN is going to do. The other option again is to do it completely locally when you do this on the install package, but we're not going to mess with that. We're just going to plug it into CDN. It's a very very quick way to do it. So if you're looking at other frameworks, you're doing other things, you'll be generally presented with this sort of choice where you can either run it locally in your own environment, or they may have a CDN delivery, and that's what CDN is. Just think of it as like a quicker way to pull it down from the cloud than having to run your own stuff locally. That's an easier way to understand it. So I'm going to copy I'm going to copy this because I'm going to need it. I'm going to keep a copy to my clipboard, but I'm going to show real quick here in this where it says read the docs. We're going to open that because this shows where in context that line of code that I just copied goes. We can copy it out of here too if we need to, but this takes us directly to an introduction and quick start. And this is, tells you what it is, says powerful feature packed front end toolkit. That's exactly what it is. And the very first example it has tells you how to get started. So the first thing it tells you to do is create a new index.html. There's that internet standard I was telling you about, calling your root HTML file index, which we have. We already have that, right? And then include the meta name viewport tag and some for responsive behavior, which we did last time. You recall this is that tag that they're talking about. And here's their example HTML boilerplate code. And if you look at it, it's really, really similar to the code that we have. There's maybe a few different characters in there that are very standard. Like we didn't set our language to English. They set their character set to UTF-8. Anybody remember from Dave, I think one, we were talking about different encodings. What does UTF-8 mean and what does it do? And why would somebody put that on their site?
I think UTF-8 is like you can read all other characters other than English.
Yes, exactly. Do you remember what the other character set that covers English is?
The ASCII code or something?
Yes, ASCII, ASCII. Yes, very good. All right, so this is the boilerplate stuff, and this looks real similar to what we have in our base, except we have some Django stuff in here, and we've got some navigation stuff. But other than that, we've got this viewport element that it says we should have. We have a title just like they do, right? See, they got a title, except it says Bootstrap Demo on theirs. Now, what we're gonna do is scroll down here. It says include Bootstrap CSS and JS. This says where to put the JavaScript as well. We're just gonna use the CSS for now, but it shows you where to put the JavaScript. And I do want to highlight that these are different places. So this link tag right here is the one that I copied from before. And if you look in the place that they put it, it's in the head tag. So it's in the head element. It's in the same place we put the meta tag where the viewport is, their char set, UTF-8, and their title. It's in the head tag. So this link is that one line that I copied from before. You can copy it here if you wanted to, but we're just going to use this one line. And that's where CSS is. The JavaScript needs to go into the body, not the head. And it has to do with the way this is loaded when the page is loaded and the order in which you want things loaded. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. But so I've copied this one link tag. It's kind of long, but I'm just going to take this one tag and I'm just going to drop it straight into my base right next to actually, you know what? I'm going to put it underneath this tag. So I'm just going to drop it into my head tag. I'm going to start by putting it underneath. And let's talk about what's inside of this real quick, just so we know all the parts and pieces, because it's all cool and great to be able to copy and paste stuff, but we shouldn't just blindly do that. I definitely encourage you to copy and paste things from places, but you have some idea of what's happening, and you don't want to copy any sort of malicious code or anything like that, right? So let's have a look at what this is doing and what the parts and pieces are. So first of all, this href attribute should be familiar. We've seen this already. We used it, the hyperlink reference, to reference our own style sheets in the past. This is doing the exact same thing, except just going over the internet to do it, right? So this is HTTPS, and this is just the directory path to a CSS file. As you can see, this should look really familiar. It's got the same slashes. So you see these are all directory names. And then you see this bootstrap dot, this min part, this means minified. You'll see this a lot with CSS JavaScript because we've said this before, but just to remind you, these front-end languages don't really care about the indentation like Python did. They care more about all these brackets and braces and things like that. And when it goes to compile and run, it's called minified. It's broken down into one line. All the extra space that humans use to read is taken out because the computer's just going to read it from left to right in one shot. And that takes up a little bit less space to do it that way. So they minify CSS and JavaScript often. That's what that means. And so there's CSS. So there's just a CSS file, just like the one we made, except it's in a server wherever Bootstrap keeps their files. I don't really know where Bootstrap servers are. But since they're using a content delivery network, they've got them all over the place. They've got one somewhat close to us, most likely. All right, and then so here's this relationship attribute, which we used before, and it's telling us what sort of relationship this is. Again, similar to what we've done before. This is a style sheet. It's a CSS. It's going to be a style sheet. And then it's this next pretty long tag called integrity. This is a security feature. It uses an encryption method called SHA-384. It's this little first part of what's called a hash. We're not going to get into this. So it's not a cryptography or cryptology class. And we're not going to talk about salting and hashing passwords and how you make these things and what this is doing under the hood. But basically what this does is this is sent along with the request. I keep highlighting too much. So this integrity tag is sent along with the request, and it checks this file, this CSS file. And if anything has changed since this integrity tag, sorry, I keep moving this over too far. But if this integrity tag, anything has changed since the last time this was made, it will not load that file. So it's like a security measure to make sure that nothing malicious can be put in there and only official changes are allowed. Yes, really, he's got a question.
So is that similar to like a randomized password, like one of a kind?
Yeah, it is. It is. So this, yeah, this hash right here will match only one other thing following this SHA-384 pattern. Like this is a pattern of hashing things, and this hash itself can be deciphered in to match one thing.
Yeah, for that.
Yeah, cool. And then the last tag that's in your last attribute tag, no, excuse me, is this thing called cross origin. This is similarly somewhat of a security feature. Basically, what it's telling it to do is treat the request that this comes back with and this information as coming from this project, right? Even though this is an outside source, this file doesn't exist in our file structure. This is some other place. We're telling it to treat it like it is from here and not treat it like it's some sort of foreign, you know, unexpected request that we didn't want. This is a request we do want. So that's all this cross origin anonymous thing is doing. And that's it. So you see there's no closing tag like our link before. This just has that end greater than sign to close off the thing. And now we have it. Now we have Bootstrap in here. That's it. There's, nothing super momentous about that. But now what we can do is we can start using the classes that are built into Bootstrap. So now part of, again, this is not a design class, so we're skipping through a lot of the design, but when you've designed your website, what you're going to do is you're going to look through documentation of whatever framework you've decided to use and figure out what sorts of things are in there, right? So there's things about layouts in here with different ways you can make stuff look, right? There's forms, there's different, say, components that you could put in there. And all these things, if you look over here, I'm looking on this left-hand side. If you choose something, let's say you want to do, I don't know, a badge of some sort or a carousel of information. And what you're going to do is you just scroll down, you choose that section over here on the left, and you'll scroll down, they'll have HTML examples. You can just copy this entire thing. But again, you are looking for these classes, any relevant ID that you might need. Usually it's classes that you're looking for. And you're just going to add these classes to the things that you want to give that characteristic to, right? So you look for the right characteristic in here that you want, the behavior you want, front end look and feel that you want to get. You find out the name of that class that does it, right? So this two class names, carousel and slide, that does this particular thing. And we're going to add those in. So for the purpose of our course, we're not going to do the design and choose colors and stuff like that. We're just going to grab a couple of things and move forward with it. But again, this is where you would find what sorts of things you want is in the documentation. So we're going to update this to not have these horrible colors and do some slightly less horrible colors. And we're going to change our calls here. So we have a body tag right now. It's set to that main background, which is just blue. And we're going to change this to a built-in class from Bootstrap, a couple of them, actually. And we're going to set the background to be like a dark background and the text itself to be a lighter text that'll show up on that dark background. So we're going to do BG dark and text dash light. So these two classes are built in automatically. So when I hit save on this, I shouldn't have to do collect static again because this isn't a static file. This is just a HTML file. So I should be able to just reload server-side code with that one change. All I've done is bring in Bootstrap and then use some of the classes. Let's see how that affects our site. So as you can see, it changed the site. It made the background dark and this part, the text, light. The font changed a little bit too. See, it's a different font now. Our buttons disappeared, but you can see that those fonts are there. But they're no longer backed up in green. Why do we think that is? Why did that happen?
Because we're in Bootstrap now and it overrid the background colors that we set up before.
It did. It did. But those are still here. So how does it know which one to use?
It used the href, right?
Well, we're still calling the green background here on this A thing. We haven't changed this at all. The only thing we changed was the body tag, right? So why is it that we can no longer reference, or we're not seeing on our front end, if you're following along, they're not backed up in green here. It don't look like that. Sorry, I can close this. We don't need that.
we didn't save it in the URL.
So let's try this, and maybe this work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this above. So all I did was move the tag to where it's above our custom one. Save this, reload it on the server side, and see if this affects the way things are done. And now, as you can see, it's like a mix. Now we do have the green background, but we also have the dark background. So now we got both. Interesting, right? So the reason I highlight this is when we first put this in, we put it on line 10. So it was beneath our custom CSS. And our CSS didn't load at all. We didn't have it. It was still there. It was still plugged in. We were still referencing exactly the same way, but it didn't come out on the front end. And then all we did was move this up to line 8, and now they both work. So we're not going to dive deep into why that's the case, but keep in mind that this is loaded top to bottom. It's very important, the order in which you put these things and where you place these things, right? So I told you that we put this in the head element, these links to style sheets. Both of them go in here. But keep in mind that if you have multiple of these, if you're pulling from different sources, which you may, keep in mind that the order in which they are loaded will affect what attributes are seen, what classes are available, and how it's loaded in the front end. Does that make sense conceptually without, again, diving into why it loaded the way it did?
I mean, is it like an order of operation? Like this sees this first, and so it does this?
Yes, it is. It is. And so again, just showing that simple change of putting the order of these two link elements in relation to each other, right? The order that they go in dictates what is visible on the front end. So something to keep in mind. And that's also why, if you go back, and we're not going to do this with the JavaScript, because we're going to write our own JavaScript, but if you're using JavaScript, and I'll scroll back up to the introduction and get started, the JavaScript needs to go into the body tag for similar reasons. If you're trying to set up JavaScript and use framework to do it, if you're using Bootstrap's JavaScript, for example, and you want to just follow along with these things and mess around with that a little bit, because there's tons of stuff in here that it can do, definitely viable option. Remember to put your script tag, we'll be doing this in a little bit later, inside your body, not the head. That's again, common mistake. You'll start doing everything like the links, scripts go in the body. And it'll similarly just not work the way you expect it to if you put these things in the wrong place on the page. Everybody tracking that?
Right.
Questions so far? No? All right, so I'm going to save this because again, we want to basically ignore our CSS, I'm pretty sure. But we're going to take those things out anyway, so that's okay. All right, so the next thing that we're going to work with, let's refresh that, make sure it's gone. Yeah, so it's gone. So these have disappeared. The next thing we want to go through though is a really commonly used element. I'm just going to go ahead and remove these classes because we're not using these classes anymore. A really commonly used element in front-end development called a div, in short for division. So when we talked about how we are differentiating the space that we have, the div element is a really common way to do that. So they're not something that you generally see on the page, but you use divs, the division, to like break up your page into logical groupings of things. And you use divs to put a lot of these stylings on them, right? So you put a lot of your stylings on a div. So let's try this out. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about, right? So right now, you see how our page looks all right. I mean, it's starting to look a little better. The color scheme at least is somewhat better. The font is a little bit not so generic. I mean, it's generic-ish, but not as bad. We see how everything's kind of pushed over to the side. What we're going to do is we're going to try to contain this in the middle so that it's off the sides of the page a little bit. We're going to do that with our div element. So it's div. And we're going to give it the class attribute container. I want to close this off. It's going to give us our closing tag. And what I want to do, you saw I put this right underneath our body. So it's inside of the body, but I want to wrap our nav element all the way down to this end block, like this entire thing. I want it to be in this division because I want to contain everything that's on the page. So this is the full content of the page. So everything inside the body tag is going to be inside of the div, right? So there's my end div tag right in front of my end body tag, rows 19 to 20 respectively. All this stuff inside the nav element, our content block, all that's going to be inside this container. And what that's going to do is going to push it off the sides a little bit and give us a way to manipulate this space distinctly, everything that's in this div distinctly from the body itself, right? So we can do different backgrounds, we can do different color schemes, whatever we want to do with just this div. Versus a visual thing that's also kind of like a quick hotkey trick. I'm gonna move all this stuff over. Again, I told you that the spacing doesn't matter for computers, but the convention for humans is each one of these levels, each one of these tags that you nest things inside of, you want to move everything over one set of one indentation, right? So I'm just going to highlight everything, hit control, and then I'm gonna hit the right square bracket, the closing square bracket, and it'll move everything over. And you can similarly move things to the left if you want to do, if you don't know that trick, it's pretty handy. So this, again, just a visual thing. So it's a little easier to read. Now we can see everything that's inside of our div. Just collapsed it. So we just see just the div. It's class container. And we have all of our page content, including the nav bar, everything inside of it. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to hit reload on the server side code. And while that's reloading, again, just to refresh your memory, when we go back over here and we see where everything is, it's kind of up in the upper left-hand corner, right up against the edge of the screen. And then now it should be done reloading. I'm going to refresh. And you see when I hit refresh, it moved everything over. I just pushed everything over a little bit more to the middle of the page. And that already, again, with just this little change, that already looks a little bit better on the page, right? Now if we inspect this, we'll turn off our responsive stuff. And just have a look at all the things that are happening. I'm also going to scroll down a little bit. All right, so here, as I hover over this, here's our div container. And as you can see, it is wrapped around everything that we have in there. But it doesn't go all the way down to the bottom of the page, right? So the body is larger. And so it goes, that goes down to the bottom of the page. But this div just is only as big as the stuff that's inside of it. And right now we just have this one H1 element and we have our nav bar. That's all inside of our div. Now, if you look over here, when I click on that div, we look over here in styles, this is all the different stuff that's in it. There's a CSS. So if we wanted to write our own CSS to make, so here's the text light class, right, that we used back in our base.html. We called it right here. Here it is. And back in here, the actual class definition. So we could have just written this ourselves. We could have written this BS text opacity, set it to 1, and then do this color with the RGB A and some, whole bunch of things going on here with different variables and whatnot. We could do all that. Or we could import from CDN, bootstrap, and just write the word text light with a hyphen in there and get the same result, right? So this is what frameworks are doing for us. So all the CSS that's here, we didn't have to write. We're just using it by calling the classes. Same thing with the div, pushing it all off the side, making it look a little bit better. That making sense? Any questions about what's going on here and why we're doing these things and how this is working, or anything really?
Wait, how you was editing in the inspect tab? In the inspect
Yeah,
menu?
so I just right click anywhere and hit inspect, and then it'll
Mhm.
pop up a developer console over here on the right hand side.
Yeah.
And then you can see your styles. It's right down here, second section. Cool.
Mhm.
All right, so let's do a couple other things before we move on to JavaScript, which is definitely gonna be a fun part, and we'll leave some time for it. But just to make this kind of complete visually satisfying, we can't see our buttons, so let's do something about that. Let's go back to our base.html and just add a couple of classes to our nav bar that, again, built into Bootstrap, that we can just use, that will make our navigation look more like a navigation bar. So we're going to use nav bar dash nav is what it's called. Again, I didn't choose the class name. That's what Bootstrap called it. And we're going to change the background color to something that's going to stand distinctly from this dark background. Like, so we have dark up here in the body. We want our navigation bar to be somewhat different. So it's a less dark version of that. All right. So let's add those two class calls just directly into our nav bar, or nav element rather. Save it, reload. And then once that's done, hit refresh on this, and it looks totally different. Now you have these big buttons right across the top. So now our A tags are stretched out across the entirety of our div container, right? They fill up the whole thing, and they go right across the top. And it looks more like an expanded top nav bar. It's, this may not be exactly what you want in your site all the time, but if our philosophy was a mobile first design, this might be a viable option because, having a couple of buttons at the top for your navigation bar is not that weird on a mobile device or a mobile web app, right? So they still function the same way. We can go to the about page. So this is the about page. We can go to the home page. It's the home page. These things are, it's called responsive automatically. So when I make the page larger and smaller, you see the buttons stay kind of in the middle of the page. They fill up to a certain point. As it gets really wide, all the content stays in the middle. It doesn't keep getting wider, and then it pops out at different widths. All that behavior, again, is coming built in with Bootstrap. We could have written all that stuff in ourselves, like the shapes of these buttons and all this CSS that does all this. Or we could just write these two classes. Cool. Everybody with that so far for the most part? Any questions about how we got here, what we've done up to now? All right. So now with this, very similarly, we can take things from other places around the internet and use content in our site. So I'm going to go to this Giphy thing, grab a GIF, just something to move around. See something that looks like we want to put it on there. How about this one? All right, so let's pick a picture that we like. We'll say, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want my site to be. I want a bunch of Japanese characters floating down in green, looking like the Matrix. So we look for something on the page called embed. It's got a ton of ads all over the place, but somewhere over here, embed. When I click on this, so give me this box that pops up, and there's somewhat familiarly looking. This is obviously HTML right here in this embed code where it says iframe. That's just for loading videos and stuff like this is. We're not going to talk too deep about what that is. There's a little selector here that says responsive. I'm going to flip that to on. We like responsive. And when I do that, you'll notice that the code moves into a div, right? So I'm going to copy this code. I'm going to go back to my base.html. And I'm going to put that in. Actually, I don't want to put it in base. Let's do this in just our home page. So this is going to be content that I want on one page. Our nav bar, we want it on every page, right? This content I want on just my homepage, or the index, as we call it. All right, so let's make a few changes. Say like, look at my site. We're all very happy that it's here. And now I'm just going to paste in that div that I got from Giphy. There's a bunch of stuff going on here. We don't have to walk through absolutely all of it, but again, we shouldn't just be copying and pasting things if we don't know what they are. So let's walk through it a little bit. I'm going to hit enter. Yes, Alex, you got a question?
Yeah. Can you show me how you got the iframe from the website?
Yeah. So just look for something. I'm using Giphy as an example, but a lot of sites will have this, anything called embed. And you just click on that and it'll pop up a little pop-up window with the code in it. And there's this little toggle between responsive off and on. So I just went to just Giphy.com in a Google search to open this up. I think it's listed, or let me see. Yeah, there's a link to Giphy in the documentation for today, if you want to use that site specifically. But then, yeah, once I did that, I said responsive to on, so it comes in this div. So we're using the same div element that we were talking about, and then I just copy the code.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So we've got this copied in here. I'm going to try to pull this down so it's a little bit easier to read. This is kind of a long tag, but it's several tags inside of each other. So we can kind of make some space here. Yeah, I realize what you got.
Yeah, when I copied mine, it came with the iframe, but not the div. What did I do wrong?
So you probably left this as responsive as off. So you
Okay,
see that when you don't toggle it to on, it's just the iframe.
gotcha.
And when you toggle it to on, it comes in the div. And wrap it in a div. So one of the reasons again that I'm showing this is highlighting what divs do for us as a thing, is that it quite literally gives us the responsiveness, that moving in and out of with the screen when it's getting larger and smaller. That's what that does. You still got a question, Relius, or you just didn't put your hand down?
Oh, sorry.
No, no worries. Just want to make sure. I don't want to assume. All right, cool. I've just pasted this in and I've kind of moved things around in the tags so it's a little easier to see which tag is what and where things are going in reference to each other. There's nothing inside of this iframe. It's really just the stuff in the tag itself. So we don't have to dissect all the parts of this iframe. This source thing, we're going to be talking about that soonish when we start doing our own HTML. But you see, it's just a reference to something, right? It's a reference to another file, location, directory, something, right? So very similar patterns that we're following with our links and our other references. So we're just pulling something in from Giphy.com. It's got some styling in here on specifically like the width and the styles and stuff like that. So it's not using, it's using the HTML styles to do all that. And then down here, this is the end of our div. So that's the responsive part. And then this is just a paragraph with our good friend, the A tag that has a link back to that page. And then it says via Giphy, right? So there's just a little thing on the page that's going to say, oh, this is where you got it. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to reload the code. Yes, Aurelius, what do you got?
You don't need to break it down like that, do we? Would it still
No,
read?
you can just paste it and leave it all on one line. I just kind of did that so it's a little easier to see what's happening. But if you just paste it one line, it'll work exactly the same way. Because again, the computer does not care about these spacings. All right, so I reloaded the code. And we go back here and I refresh. We should see now we got that cool matrix looking streaming down thing on our site or on my site, I guess. And then there's the link via Giphy down here. You see down here in the lower left. So let's say, we don't want that link there because I think this just links back to the same spot anyway. If I just click right in the middle of a GIF, it goes back to that anyway. So we could just get rid of that by erasing this p tag. I'll save it. I'll reload it. I want to go back to my site. See the little via Giphy link down here at the bottom. When I refresh my page, if I don't like that part, it's gone. Now it's not there anymore. Let's see.
What was P tag again?
So p tag just is for paragraph. So that's the best way to put in text of any kind. And so our p tag was just holding a link back to here. So it had an a tag inside of it. Right here. So here's the a tag closing up, and here's the p tag closing up. So ours just had a link back that said via Giphy, and I decided for design reasons I didn't like that, so I wanted to remove it because this goes back anyway as an iframe. This is a link back to Giphy the same way. So we don't need that reference if we don't want it. But so that is how to embed content from the internet. And as you can see, our page still works the same way. We can still navigate to the about page, back to the home page, and now we have some sort of something on it with some kind of look to it. Any question about how we did that or how that works?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Sure.
So I did erase the P tag, but when I hover my mouse over to the matrix looking,
Yeah.
it still take me to the link.
Yeah. It still works as a link. So I think this iframe still works that same way. So that's why I take it out of there. It's redundant. But again, something to mess around with embedded content and see how it works. So yeah, it will still work as a link out to Giphy.
Okay.
So that is expected.
You cannot get rid of it?
Yeah, I don't know. I've never really tried that hard. because
Okay.
I do kind of want to give these guys props for giving it to me. You know what I mean? Like I don't really mind. But and also
Yeah,
this isn't like a professional site or anything. Yeah.
in the error on my side.
Mhm.
The unclosed tag on line 3.
Uh-oh. Unclosed tag. I bet you right here. So if you're following, make sure that you have your content, your block closed properly with the percent sign and the curly bracket in that order.
Yeah,
Percent sign, then curly bracket.
gotcha.
And if it's not that one, if it's an HTML tag that's not closed, then again, make sure that you have all of your end greater than signs on like the what they call the opening tag, right? So this div tag at the top is the opening tag, and here's the closing tag. So make sure that you have both of those on the ones that require it, which most require it. There's only a few like meta tags and stuff like that in the head that don't, for the most part. That should hopefully solve that error.
Yep, error solved.
Cool. Cool. All right, nice. So that is really the simplicity, the beauty of using frameworks generally. It makes the front end work a lot faster. You can use pre-built stuff instead of having to go try to figure out like how do I make my buttons line up in the middle and make the text center itself and change when I hover over it. Don't mess with any of that. Just find a framework that does it for you and tell it to do that with its class references. All right, so let's shift gears into JavaScript. So we're going to talk a little bit about JavaScript. We're going to write some JavaScript. We're going to talk about where it fits into the internet, what it does, why we want to use it. We're not going to use Bootstrap's JavaScript, even though you can, just like we did with CSS. So just keep in mind that we're going to put it into the body tag. When you do that, we're going to do that ourselves here in a minute. But before we use JavaScript, generally speaking, it's what makes websites dynamic and interesting, and it's what makes reactive to user input in some way, like when they click on the screen or they drag things or they move stuff and they do things. It gives them alerts, it gives them feedback, it helps route things. JavaScript is really, really useful, helpful on the internet. It's not fully unavoidable. You can do a lot of the stuff that we're going to do. I mean, in this course, we're not going to do a lot with JavaScript. We're going to use one example today. We're going to set ourselves up to do give users a confirmation when they delete a task, because again, our app is going to be a task list, a to-do list, right? So we want a delete function when you hit delete on a task to pop up and say, hey, are you sure you want to do that? And just get a user confirmation. So we're going to code that confirmation today in JavaScript. This is a non-contrived use case for JavaScript. It's a real common way to use it. But I want to reiterate, it's not necessary. Like we will at one point refactor our code to where we can just use Python and we just use Django to do the same thing. But I want to show where JavaScript fits in, how it is, how you use it, because sometimes you may not be able to avoid it. This may be the best option for you using JavaScript to solve your problem. And as you can see in here, when you look at a lot of the things that can be done using JavaScript, you're going to really want to understand where you can plug it into your site, because it's going to really help with web development all the way around. So without any more talking about it, let's go back and use some JavaScript. So back in our base.html, so the same place that we put our Bootstrap and we put our CSS, we're going to write some JavaScript directly into this file, right? So like we did last time, we started with CSS and we just put it inside of a tag, inside of if you recall, a style tag up here in the head. We'll do a similar thing, only this time, just like it says in the Bootstrap documentation, we're going to go into the body tag, right? So we're going to go somewhere in the body tag. It does not have to be in the div, right? So we can put it outside of our div, because scripts are not visible parts. We don't care where they're not on the page really, but it does need to load with the body. So this has to do with how things are loaded once the page loads and the internet, the web browser loads the page. So outside of the div, below the div, but inside the body. So I'm right above my closing body tag. I'm going to open a script tag. When I close it up, it'll give me the ending tag. Go ahead and hit enter. Now, just like the style tag before, inside it, the style tag expected CSS. This script tag will expect JavaScript. So we can write directly in JavaScript right here. We don't have to do anything further. We're not going to be writing in HTML now. We're going to be writing in JavaScript. So before we start writing, start defining our stuff and doing what we're doing. This, as just a caveat, is going to look a lot like Python in some of its things, but there are going to be a lot more brackets and braces and things like that, some slight differences. The main thing here is to kind of understand what's happening and where it fits into everything. This is in the JavaScript class. We're not going to dive way into JavaScript or anything like that. But let's think logically on what we want to do, right? So I told you we're going to do a confirmation delete button, right? So think about the scenario there. What is the first thing that happens before our confirmation pops up? Like, what's going on the site and what are users doing? Not a trick question, but it is a question. Look, what are our users doing?
Typing the website in.
No, so like it's a to-do list, and our confirmation here is going to give them confirmation when they want to delete a task. So what have they done to delete that task? Like to let the system know that they want to delete the task. What do they do?
Select the task.
Select a task. They got to press a button, right? They got to click something that says they want to delete that task, right? So generally speaking, we're going to be looking for the user input that clicks a delete button, right? So we're going to have like the task name. We say select a task. You could choose a task and then hit a separate delete button, or you could have delete button built into the task itself and just have a delete next to it and delete it that way. Either way, at some point, they're going to have to press a delete button, right? That's when we want to give them this confirmation. So what's going to happen is when they press that button, a request is going to get sent. And what we're going to do is have our JavaScript stop that behavior, the default behavior that the button press was going to do, and give a confirmation that says, hey, is that really what you want to do? If the user says yes, it will allow the default behavior to happen. If the user says no, it'll just do nothing and just cancel that request. That's generally the scheme of what we're doing. Does that all make sense to everybody? Kind of conceptually what we're going to build here in a sec. All right, cool. Appreciate the thumbs up, man. That's really helpful. All right, let's do this. So we're going to define first our confirm delete function. And what this is going to do is it's going to prevent the default behavior of the button press, right? So we think about our flow of what we're going to do. That's the flow. So to do this in JavaScript, we define a function very explicitly with the word function, and then we give it the name that we want to give it. And JavaScript uses camel case a lot more than Python does. So camel case, to remind you, is lowercase in the beginning. We confirm, and then capital letter for the second word. I'm going to do confirm delete. So it's all one word, but the second word is capitalized. And then it's open parentheses, close parentheses, similar to a Python function or pretty much most functions that I can think of. And then inside is going to be inputs. Now, this is somewhat of a reserved word in JavaScript. So an event. Event could be anything that users do. So in our case, it's going to be a click. They're going to be clicking on a button that says delete, but it could be, touching a touch screen. It could be hitting a key on the keyboard or saying something into a microphone or any of the inputs that users can do on a website. That's what an event refers to. Okay, so this is the name of our function. This is the input to our function inside of the parentheses. And now we need to have curly brackets, open and closed. And inside those curly brackets is where the logic and the actual function itself is going to be. So remember in Python, we did a colon and then we did space and there was indentation and stuff that was relevant. This has curly brackets. This is how JavaScript knows that this is what's going to happen. So what we're going to do is we are going to first stop the default behavior of this event. So again, in our case, we know that the event, or we expect the event to be a click. We're going to tell it to be a click later, but first we know that the event's going to be a click. So we're going to say event dot, that's very similar to what we've done in the past with Python, using dot notation to do something with it. And we're going to use prevent default. This is built into JavaScript, very useful. And it, again, prevents the default behavior of an event. That's exactly what it's for. And we close that off with a semicolon. Remember that. It's very important. Just like CSS, JavaScript uses semicolons to let everyone know that that's the end of that line, because once again, this will be compiled down to one single line. And what it does, it just reads it left to right. And so it'll go like this, and it'll say, okay, cool, this is where the end of the line was, and it'll move on to the next thing. But it doesn't use spacing and indentation like Python did. So these things are important. Don't forget them. All right, great. So now what we're going to do, we've prevented the default behavior. So we want to see if the user wants to confirm that. So we want to put a piece of logic in here that's going to say just an if statement, say like, hey, if we confirm this task, cool. If not, then we're going to do nothing, basically. So we in JavaScript, just like in Python, we're just going to use the word if, which is a nice reserved word, but we have to put our logical statement inside parentheses in JavaScript. So if confirm, and again, that's built into JavaScript, we're just going to use this confirm thing. And it's going to have a whole pop-up window with, I think it says like, okay and cancel. And it says that the name of your website says, and then you could pass it whatever message you want to put it, that's going to pop up on that pop-up screen. Again, so all that stuff is built into JavaScript with just this command confirm. We don't have to write any of that, which is really nice. But since we're doing a delete task confirmation, we could just write delete task with a question mark, or are you sure you want to delete the task? However you want to phrase it, doesn't really matter. But again, we have to make sure that our logical statement is going to return a Boolean of true or false, right? Is inside of parentheses. So we have two parentheses at the end. One is for this delete task, for this confirm input with the message that's going to be in our pop-up. All right, so since this is an if statement, and we're going to follow the pattern of JavaScript, we need curly brackets. I'll do opening, closing, and hit enter. It'll take me inside. Again, this is indenting just for ease of reading. It doesn't, the indentation is not relevant to the computer. It doesn't care. Now, this is the case of if this is true. So basically, this is read like if this is true. So this returns true that the task was confirmed, meaning that on that pop-up, the user hit okay or yes or whatever it is we want to say is the confirmation. Then we're going to tell JavaScript to grab the window, which is the whole page, right? And we say location. And these things, again, these are reserved words that are built in that we don't need to do any coding to tell it where that window is or how to find it. It's all just in there, which is nice. And then we say location, and then href is sent or set to event.target.href. So this piece right here is basically saying, all right, we have prevented the default. We've stopped it, and we've asked for confirmation. If we get confirmation, then we want this location of the window to be the reference that the event was originally going to go to. So whatever this thing was going to do before we stopped it, that's what we want it to do now. This word target, that's what when you open, like when you're writing web pages and you have an A tag and you click, you could put target up in here and do, you know, I think it's underscore blank or something like that. And that'll open in a new tab. It'll open a new window. And target basically tells these sorts of things what it is supposed to be going to, right? That's why they call it target. So in our case, down here in our JavaScript, the target was set when we click the button, right? So we click the delete button in our case. The target is going to be deleting that task. It's sending the, which we'll talk about how that works when we set up our backend and stuff next week. But we prevented that default, and now we're basically just saying, all right, now go ahead and do that with this window. Do what you were going to do because we got confirmation. All right, everybody following that so far? All right. So that is our confirm delete functions. We have done that. So we don't have to put another other case in there. If they decline, the user declines this, it'll just do nothing, right? If we don't put any more script in here, don't tell it to do anything, the other case is just nothing, right? So it'll just kind of go back to where it was. So it'll just not delete the task, which is what we want. All right, so the next thing we need to do, we have this function, which is great. It's useful. It's all kinds of cool. But what we need to do now is somehow get it tied to the buttons on our page, right? So remember what the buttons on our page are typically these A tags, right? So we have to somehow reference those things and say, all right, when they click a delete button, which one's the delete button, right? So we have to somehow tell this thing to go find the delete buttons on our page and then listen. That's what it's called. It's called an event listener. Listen for clicks. So like find all the delete buttons. There might be a bunch of them. And listen to see if any of those have been clicked. And as soon as they're clicked, do this confirm delete thing. All right, so we have to do that, setting up our listening, our checking it out. The way we're going to do that is we're going to set up a variable. In JavaScript, you have to be explicit and write var instead of just writing the name like you did in Python. So we write var, and then we're going to give this a descriptive name, and I'm going to call it delete buttons, plural, because this is going to be all the delete buttons that are on the page. There could be several of them, right? So the way that we're going to design this is that each task itself is going to have its own delete button right next to it. So there might be several delete buttons. So we're going to do say document. Again, that's a way to reference the HTML page that you're on is called document. And then this thing right here is called query selector all. This piece is how you, here, let me get some more space so we're not right down at the bottom. This query selector all is how you grab all the stuff off the page, right? So this is where we are taking our document, the HTML document that we have. Again, remember we called it doc type is HTML. So this document is an HTML document. This is the document it's referring to. And query selector all is going to collect everything from that page that matches what we put here as a string, right? So we enter a string, and that's what our query is going to be. Query, not something we use frequently in everyday life, but we use it all the time when we're talking about sending requests to databases. We'll be talking about it next week. It's basically just the thing being requested. The thing you're asking for is the query, right? So we're going to enter that as a string, and we're going to enter this as a class. So the idea here with our particular design is we're going to assign a class to buttons that will be a delete button class, right? So we use a period because it's going to be a CSS class that we're going to use. And we'll do btn dash delete. This could be anything. We could call this whatever we want to do. This is us making it up. But we want to do something we're going to remember and is descriptive. So I'm going to say it's button delete. We could put delete button or whatever you want it to do. But it is what we want. Just remember to make it a class, period in front of it, right? So this is going to look for every class on our page that is a button delete class. And it'll put it in this delete buttons variable. Cool. So now we've gone and found all our delete buttons. Now, what do we need to do? Logically, anybody. We have a group of delete buttons.
You have to link it to the confirm delete function.
Yes. Yes. Very good. All right. So if we have more than one of these, what sort of thing, sort of data structure, data type, do you think this will be?
String.
Think it'll be a string? Okay. What makes you think that?
Because the button will be named delete, right?
Okay. This will be a string. Yeah, this will be a string. But this is going to be a bunch of things. So what data types do we know that could be a bunch of things? They're like collections of things.
List?
Lists, dictionaries, in JavaScript, they're called objects. Doesn't really matter what this is exactly. The idea is that it's going to be an iterable, something that has several things inside of it that we can iterate through, right? So that means that if we want to do something to each of these, then we're going to use, anybody? What do we use? What general construction do we want to use? It's one of our,
What was the question?
if we want to do something to each object inside of an iterable, if we want to grab one out of it and do something to each one of them, what
You got to define it.
we've defined it here, but
Okay.
now we want to go through each one of them and do something. What is that called? We go through each one of something and do something. What is that general construction called? We are looping through it, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so it's a for loop. For each thing that's in there, we're doing a loop, right? So we want to do something very similar to this. So for each one of these things, we want to loop through and do something to each one, right? So we want to attach this confirm delete to it or listen to see if it's been clicked, right? All right, so remember in Python, we did that with just the word for. In JavaScript, it's a little bit different. We start with the thing that we're going to loop through. So our iterable, which I hate that word, but it's used frequently. So the thing that we can iterate through are delete buttons, object or list that we made up here, right? So we expect that to be a whole bunch of buttons that have this class. And we're going to do for each and parentheses. This is how we do a for loop in JavaScript. So this is going to do for each thing that's in this delete buttons. We want to do the following, right? So we open up parentheses, close parentheses automatically show up, and we're going to do what's called an anonymous function because we don't give it a name. We just write the word function. And then we're going to give it this. This can be of any name we want to, but I'm going to put button in here because we just want to keep it in mind that each of these things that's in this delete buttons, there is a button that's in there, is a delete button. So each button that's in buttons, right? That's why I chose that. So it's kind of tracking what it is we're grabbing. Now inside, still inside our for each loop, right outside of this end for the function, we have to put open and closing curly brackets, right? So we should have at the end of it, curly bracket and closing parentheses. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so it's a little easier to see. And this is going to be our function call inside. So when I hit enter, give us a little bit of space. Now we're going to tell it what we want to do for each of these buttons. So we're going to say button dot. We're going to tell it to do something. And this is built into JavaScript. We're going to do add event listener. And again, it's going to listen to these buttons and see if something happens. And we got to tell it what kind of event, because remember I told you events can be all kinds of things. It could be microphone input, but it's going to be some kind of input. So we have to be explicit on what sort of event we're going to listen for. In our case, it's going to be a click. So when somebody clicks the button, we want something to happen. And the other thing that we pass to add event listener is what do we want to happen? So what we want to happen is we want our confirm delete function to run. So we do confirm delete. It's the name of the function. And that's it. That is our function. Add our semicolons around to make sure that we got them everywhere. Make sure that nothing breaks. It should be okay without these things, but just in case. All right, so what we done, just again, to walk through, make sure we got it all. So we wrote a function that's going to prevent the default behavior of a button, get confirmation from the user if they really want to do that thing. If they do, it'll allow the default behavior to happen. We've looked at our document and collected all the buttons that are classed as delete buttons. We've looped through each of those and added an event listener that's listening for a click. If it is clicked, it will run our confirm delete. So that is the logic of this JavaScript. And as you can see, it's not vastly different than Python. All right, so I'm going to save this before we move on because I have to do one other thing. What's the other thing that we have to do before we expect this to work? Alex, you got a question first.
Yeah. So what's the reason you put curly brackets inside of parentheses for delete function for loop?
For this one right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so these curly brackets are for this function. So each function has to be enclosed in curly brackets. And the outer parentheses, so this parenthesis and this parenthesis is for the for loop. Right? So basically what we're doing is we're saying for each button, run this function on that button. And that function is going to add the listener.
Oh,
That
so
make sense?
the line right there is
Mhm.
inside a for loop, right?
Yep. This whole thing is inside the for loop entirely. This
Okay.
whole thing from here actually is inside the for loop. Like all of that is inside the for loop.
Okay. I got one more question.
Sure. Yeah.
So, yeah, when you make the button that add advanced listener,
Mhm.
you see how you added confirm delete.
Mhm.
So I was wondering when you create a function confirm delete, you pass an event parameter. How come you're not using it on the bottom?
Oh, why is there no open and close parentheses here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm passing the parameter. Yeah, that's a good question, man. So that's just how JavaScript does it. That's this is really where that's kind of happening. This is where that's being passed, I guess, or
Mm.
it will be passed through here. We don't have to be explicit about it. I guess to answer your
Okay.
question. It's just it's a difference in the way because this is being used as the function that is called within this function. We don't have to explicitly pass it anything here. We're just telling it which function to use. This add event listener is going to take that and it'll give it any inputs it needs because
Okay.
it has the event already. Like this assumes that there's an event. There is a click event, so it'll have this and it'll send that click event here when it functions. It just needs to know the name of the function to use. So we're not actually calling this function here. We're just like telling this function what to do for each of these buttons. Does that make sense?
Okay. A little bit. Yeah.
A little bit, yeah. No, this is definitely slippery stuff. I mean, we got plenty of time to answer questions though. That's why I want to make sure this is really all the code we're writing today. So I want to make sure we understand what's happening here because all the JavaScript we're really going to do in the course. But I want to make sure that we understand sort of what's being done here, and it's a little different than what we've done up to now. A little bit more complex logic, but nothing super crazy. So I get it's a little slippery, but if if you got questions, definitely ask them. Is that broadly making sense though on what's happening here and what our flow is? That we're grabbing everything here, we're adding this thing that's going to wait for clicks, and when a click happens, we're going to confirm the delete. All right. Okay, so looking at this, what's the last thing that we need to do on this page? Maybe not necessarily in the script, but on this page before we leave to try to test it. Like, what's the last thing we need to do? So we don't have any tasks to delete yet, but we want to test this on something. So how can we test this with what we have now? Any ideas? All right, take a step back. What kind of thing are we going to be attaching this to? Like we've been talking about a little bit. What sorts of things on our page are users going to be interacting with?
A to-do list?
Right. Within that, though, they're going to be doing what? What are they clicking exactly? Like in terms of code, are they
Button.
clicking? Yep, clicking buttons. How have we done buttons up to now? Like how is this home and about button? What are they in the code?
What are they?
Yeah,
A
what are
tag?
they? A tags. Very good. So we can test this out by just putting our class, our button delete, on one of our existing A tags because we're going to use A tags for delete buttons too. So we can just take this button delete and we can put it on our about A tag. So we could test it out by saying, all right, cool, we'll make this a delete button. And if it works the way we expect it to, when we click the about navigation button, it'll give us a little confirmation that says, hey, are you sure you want to do that? And it won't take us to the about page right away until we confirm that we do, in fact, want to do that. So this works the way we expect it to. We've reloaded our site and we refresh. Nothing broke, which is good. We're already on the about page. So I'm going to go back to the home page. So we're on the home page. Now when I click about, hopefully, and there we go. There's a little pop-up says Hired Labs DI 42, which we recognize as the domain name, right? This is our page right here, says, and that's the part that's built in to JavaScript. It's a delete task with a question mark. As you recall, that is the message that we sent it right here. So this is the confirm thing in action. It's a little pop-up window. Whoop, right here. And if we hit OK, it should take us to the about page. If we hit cancel, it should just leave us right back where we are. So let's hit the cancel and see how that works. We'll cancel first. It looks like it worked fine. We're right back here. Nothing broke. Now, if I hit about, it pops up again. If I hit OK, it should take me to the about page. So hit OK. Now I'm back to the about page. So similarly, I can hit about again and it'll pop up with a warning. If I hit cancel, if I stay here on the about page, it doesn't take me home or something like that. If I say OK, similarly, it just goes to the about page, but I'm already here. So it doesn't really matter. But now it's working. Now we have our confirmation set up and in place as an example of how JavaScript can be employed on a website and where you would put it and how you would make it work. Any questions about that? About how we did that, why we did it? And back this up a little bit so we can kind of see it all a little better in context. No questions? All right. Cool. So the last thing that I want to do is just move this JavaScript out into our static files, because it's generally where you're going to keep scripts. And a project this size with JavaScript this complex, or this simple, I guess, we could probably leave it here. That'd be fine. But just to, go through the steps and make sure that we're doing things properly, I want to show how to set this up, and the slight differences between that and how we did our CSS, slight little differences in what we call things and the attributes that we use and where we put them. So let's go through that exercise now. Should just take a couple of minutes before the end of class. And the first thing we're going to do it in Bash console. We have to make a couple of directories and then a file inside of those directories, right? So what we're going to do conceptually is in the to-do application directory, we're going to make a static directory for static files that are specific to the to-do app. We're going to make a scripts directory inside of that, where we're going to put our confirm delete JavaScript file that we're going to make, right? So we're going to make two directories, static directory, scripts directory inside of it, and a JavaScript file inside of that directory. And that's going to be in the to-do application, because this is a to-do function. These are specific to-do list things. And also, this again is something that we could do for your static files. Here, I'm going to clear this up so it's a little easier to see. You do with your static files generally. You may want to have different styles for each application. So you're going to want to have your own style or your own static files for each application that you run. All right, so I'm going to do mkdir make dir. I'm going to make all these. You could do this again in the GUI if you wanted to, if you just want to navigate around there and make these directories that way. I'm going to do it all in one line because it's a little faster. But I'm going to do make dir, so make directory, mkdir, and I'm going to give it two things. I'm going to say to do, which exists, and then static, which does not yet. And then I'm going to say space to do static slash scripts, because that's the inner static one. And then double ampersand. I'm not hitting enter yet, so I'm not going to hit enter at all, even though it's going to hit the end of the page and kind of cycle down to the next line. This is all in one line. It's just that my screen is zoomed in, so it's going to put it all together. So I'm also going to use the touch command and just make a file while I'm at it in that directory, the scripts directory that I just made. So in the to-do slash static, I can't use tab complete because these directories don't exist yet. So scripts, make sure I spell it right, slash, I'm going to confirm delete.js. Again, you can call that whatever you want to, but you should make it somewhat descriptive. All right, hit enter on this. It's not going to give me any confirmation, but that's okay, because we're going to go back into our directory. We're going to the to-do directory. Now we have a static directory over here. If I navigate into it, we have a scripts directory, and here's our confirm delete. Again, you could have made these directories and files in the GUI if you prefer. Just make sure that you have my site, to do, static, scripts, and then a confirm delete or some sort of delete JS file in there. All right, when I open this up, it's going to be blank. There's nothing in here. So we're going to do, just like we do with CSS, we're going to take all this JavaScript that we wrote, so everything inside of the script tag, but not the script tag itself, because that's HTML. And I'm just going to Control X to copy and cut that out. Go over to my confirm delete.js, and I'll paste it in. And once again, we don't need to do anything with this formatting. I'm going to move it over just because it's easier to read that way, but the computer does not care. All right, so I'm going to save this. Now we have JavaScript in an external file. We've moved it over. It's ready to rock. Now, what do we have to do here? We have to somehow reference it, right? So we're not going to move our script tag. We're just going to close it up because there's nothing inside of it anymore. The script itself is moved. We're just going to change some attributes or add some attributes to it, similarly to what we did up here with our CSS. We have to somehow tell this page where that file is that we just made. So inside of our script tag, we're going to add some similar things up here. We used a type. We're going to use that again to tell this what type to expect. And it's text slash JavaScript, all lowercase. And then we're going to do SRC, which is short for source. So we're not using an href this time. We're using a source. Scripts use sources, not hrefs. But we still pass it strings, and we're going to use the same Django template tags that we used before to reference our static files and the path to the static files. We use this exact same pattern that we used up here. And remember that static, the word static that we loaded up here on line 2, load static. This is giving us everything in our path up to that inner directory, right? So everything up until the styles or the scripts or whatever. So we need to start at that point to tell it where to go. So in our case, it's scripts slash confirm dash delete.js. And that is our reference. Now it knows where to go. All right, so that's it. So we put in to tell what to expect and where that thing is. And remember, as a script, we reference it with source, not an href. And this script tag is in our body tag. All important parts of this. All right, so once this is saved, last thing that we have to do is what? Anybody remember? We've set up something in our static files. What do we need to do with it now to make it work? Talked about at the beginning of class. We ended the last class with it. We're going to end today with it too. What is the thing we need to do? Nobody? All right, we have to collect static. Remember, if we add a new static file, we have to collect that static file into our main static file, right? Remember that now? We talked about it before. It's a little confusing concept. We have to do it again. So to do that, we're in our bash console. We'll do Python 3 manage.py. So our entry point into our Django backend framework, and we're going to give it the command collect static, all one word. So what this does, again, is going to go through all the static files and static folders in the entire project. It's going to look for all those places, and it's going to take any new or changed files and copy them into our main underscore static directory. All right, so it's going to say, you've done this request. It's going to move everything in here. It's going to replace everything. It's going to overwrite existing files. It doesn't say just the change files, but that's what it means. And then we have to tell it, yes, we want to confirm, or no, we don't. So yes, we want to do that. We got 2 static files copied. Oh, must have made some changes to my CSS file or something. But let's see. Let's see what happened. I was expecting 1. We got 2. Maybe there's a change in the admin side. Let's see what. Actually, I'm just gonna hit the up arrow to get my tree command. Let's see what our thing looks like now. All right, so here's our static directory that we made in our to-do directory. So we made this, and this is where we wrote our code. This is this file right here. So to-do static scripts confirm.js. That's this one here. We ran collect static. Now in our static main, now we have scripts confirm delete.js. Right, so now it's all in one place. So this has the project level static files with our main style CS, and it has our application level static files all in one spot. Yes, Aurelius.
Apologize. Can I see the tree command again?
Absolutely not. Yeah, right here. So it's tree, and then this dash capital I is to pass it some sort of parameters to ignore. And then as a string, I just pass under double underscore pycache, double underscore, and then this bar is an or sign. So you can pass multiple things to ignore. I drop CSS, image, and JS because this admin thing is full of those, and it'd just be huge if we didn't ignore those. And pycache is the same. It's gigantic.
Copy that.
All right. And if you want to replace, just so you know, if you want to replace this little dot with the actual full path, you can pass it the path that, like after tree, you can just write the path that you want to boot, and it'll print it out here on top, and it's nice and pretty looking. But that's tree. All right. So now that we've collected static, we've saved everything. I'm going to reload server-side code because it's a good habit to make sure that we do that right before we go and check our site, make sure everything worked. This was just refactoring though. So this should not change, hopefully, our functionality in any way on our site. So we should, once we refresh this, nothing broke right away, which is good. And we had that confirmation on our about button. So if I press this, I should get that confirmation again. There it is, it says delete task, question mark. When I hit OK, it should take me to the about page. And it does. So there it is. We have refactored our code. to move our JavaScript out to an external place, just like the rest of our static files. Yes, Aurelius, what's the question? Aurelius, you got a question, man, or is your hand up from before?
Sorry, I got a invalid block tag on line 26 static.
Uh-oh. On line 26, invalid block tag. Okay, so I'm guessing that's this one down here. Did you misspell it?
See, static. No, it's spelled right.
And do you have this load static up at the top somewhere?
Wait, what? HT.
Yeah, see, that might be the thing. Since you didn't do the CSS file separately, you got to make sure you have this load static up at the top. If you don't, then that word static doesn't mean anything to anybody. So you have to explicitly load it right here. So this tag. If you don't have that, that might be why.
Got it.
Again, super common mistake to make, man. I've done that so many times. It's infuriating.
See,
Did that do it?
still loading.
Still working on it? Still thinking about it? All right. Anybody else got questions while he's loading that? I know we're right at time, but anybody else?
Yep, that works.
It works? Nice. Nice. So you got the confirmation message and everything when you go to the about page and you do this navigation?
It's not giving me any kind of like alert, or when I press about, it's not giving me anything, but the page is working.
Okay. So that could be, this is another thing. Since we did this in JavaScript, and JavaScript is used frequently by bad actors to do terrible things. A lot of times browsers will have settings that'll stop it from working, right? So when we moved it out to a different file, some folks in other classes have had issues with that as well. And if you can't get it to work in a separate file, that's okay. Try checking your browser settings to see if JavaScript is being stopped somewhere or if it's being prevented. One way to check is that's more excessive than we needed. Is again inspecting and going to console and hitting the buttons and seeing what happens. And seeing if you have any errors over here in your console that are saying like maybe the page isn't loading or maybe it's not finding it or something like that. And that might help out why that JavaScript thing isn't popping up. But did it pop up when it was in the HTML page?
Like any kind of errors or pop-ups or anything?
Yeah, like when you hit the about page, did this confirmation pop up before you moved your JavaScript over to a separate file?
Oh, that's naming. Oh, I didn't name that on string delete. Because I didn't think, I thought that was like an example. So I didn't name that
Oh, you didn't put this tag, this class name on there?
right now.
Yeah. So I was gonna say that's the other thing you gotta check. If you don't have your class labeled, it's not gonna do anything. But right. All right. So we're a couple minutes over. Any other questions? Anybody have? Anybody else kind of stuck somewhere? Or have questions about what we covered today? Oh, okay. Yep. See you later, Shadiqua.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Have a great night. We'll see you Tuesday for back end
All right.
development.
All right, cool. Have a good weekend.
Yep. You too.